Okay, so I think we can start. I hope you hear me well, everybody, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So the first ones, I hope you had a few minutes to look around you and think about all the items that we are surrounded by. So welcome to this info session on human rights and environmental due diligence at the Shift. So it's a topic that we have been working on for the past few years, and that will get an even more important focus in the coming years. And so we thought it would be interesting to do a catch-up session for our members, but also non-members, to understand a bit what the Shift is doing on the topic. What are we talking about exactly? So that we can start all on the same page on this essential topic. So I've asked you to look around, and when I look around me, I see there's a couch, there's a computer in front of me, there's a mouse, there's a cupboard full of stuff, there's the chair I'm sitting on, the clothes I'm wearing, there's my headphones, a carpet, paintings, the walls around me, the light bulb. Even the light bulb contains some metals. The cables, there's lots of cables, etc. So there's a big chance that the vast majority of all these items were assembled or produced abroad and contain raw materials that were extracted or were produced abroad. So which were the conditions in which they were produced or extracted? That's the question. Was there forced labor involved? Was there community relocations, water pollution, deforestation? How much carbon emissions was there, etc.? So those very important questions are among the first that we ask in a due diligence process. So as we see those items around us as finished products, we tend to forget about the production and all the raw materials that it is made of. So we feel a bit distant from those steps, from those production steps. And it's the same for a procurement manager or someone, company buying a large bunch of materials or products from a supplier. Sometimes it has like multiple intermediaries before that. I've experienced 6 years of experience at in different African countries in mining sector. Mostly, I've worked at different mining sites on mining aluminium, cobalt, and copper, and gold as well. And I've also worked on the supply chain traceability in the mining sectors, on child labor in the cobalt mining sites in Congo. And from my experience assessing and managing the impact on local communities and making sure that the communities affected by the local mines would restore or improve their livelihoods afterwards, I can tell that there's many good practice in terms of managing the impact at every level of the stage. There are ways to better trace the supply chain as well, but those are, of course, the sectors that we condemn the practice of often. And so we can say that there's definitely many worse practice, very terrible practice, environmental damage, important environmental damage, and human rights violation. But there's also good practice, and so it's important to watch those both type of practice. So who is responsible for causing all those damages? Is it the extracting company? That's a question I ask myself a lot. Is the investor, the government, the consumer, the company buying the materials or the products, or all the intermediaries? I think everyone is pointing fingers, and I've seen that from my experience. Everyone is pointing fingers at each other from one end to the other of the supply chain. So the number of actors and the complexity of it all kind of led to deresponsabilization of all actors. So due diligence implies to go a bit beyond these appearance and seek information and connect with actors in the value chain. We each have to take our part of responsibility on that end. So this applies to all sectors. I'm speaking about mining, but it applies also to textile, food, construction materials, energy, transport, IT, furniture, etc. And not only to supply chain, so the suppliers and the suppliers of our suppliers, but also to the whole value chain, sometimes we need to take into consideration the steps afterwards. So who are we selling those products to? Who are we giving money to? Who are the challenge? How are they going to handle the projects? And how is it going to be wasted? So as I said, best and worst practice exists, and responsible exploitation and production and traceability are possible, but require attention and resources. Now, doing due diligence is asking from whom we want to supply, or rather how we can help our suppliers and our clients to improve their working conditions and the production conditions, and asking us whom we want to give money to, how to do it, and how to make sure that they use this money wisely. So a quick introduction on the Shift. So as many of you know, we are the Belgian Network for Sustainability with around 500 members, both enterprise, large-scale enterprise and small-scale enterprise, and medium-scale, of course, NGOs, lots of association, public and academic actors. So actors from all the society. We work a lot on the SDGs, and there's an important figure I like to remind on the SDGs that stress the importance of doing due diligence is the Belgian spillover index. So the Sustainable Development Solution Network makes a report every year providing the SDG index, in which the Belgium is on the fifth rank. And it classifies the countries based on their advancement to the SDGs. But they also have the spillover index, on which Belgium is only 147th. And this spillover index takes into consideration all the externalities based on the consumption, the policies, and the production that we export abroad. So that demonstrates how much our impact lies abroad and not within our borders. So human rights and environmental due diligence applies to all of the main thematics on which the Shift is working on. First is biodiversity, and we've spoken about that before. There's water pollution, environmental pollution, deforestation caused in all the value chain. And so we work on biodiversity in Belgium, but it's also important to think about the impact on the value chain. And as demonstrates the spillover index, sometimes maybe even more important. Climate change, of course, the carbon emissions through the supply chains are important to take into consideration as well. And talking, for instance, about the solar panels, it's great in terms of reducing the carbon emissions here, but it just reports the carbon emission in probably the construction sites, but also in the areas where I've been, where we extracted the materials, where carbon emissions are important. Human rights, of course, we're talking about working conditions, but also right of communities, right of employers, and etc. And there's lots of violation in our supply chain, so it's important to work on this as well. And the Shift works on the topic. And work and inclusion, which might sound a bit more indirect, but it's as important as if we want to achieve the SDGs at the international level. As the SDGs 17 states, we have to work together, collaborate. And that will go through only work and inclusion. That means considering all the actors from all over the world and giving them the same voice. So integrate as well the local farmers, but the large-scale enterprise. And it's important to have this kind of very open and inclusive dialogue on these topics, because we are all concerned about these issues. And last but not least, the Shift is also the national contact point for the B Corp. So it's a label for enterprise that determines the commitment to from the enterprise to sustainability, and it's a label for an overall enterprise, not for a product. And in some, we've seen that in some of the business impact assessment tool, which is the tool used to determine the company score, there are some categories where value chain represent up to 40%. So watching out for your impact in your value chain is also important to achieve the value chain, the B Corp label. So before I start explaining a bit our activities and go a bit more into concrete details, I want to give the floor to Rosie Davenport, who we from Impact Focus, who we commissioned a couple of weeks ago to write an article about the origin of the terminology due diligence, because it's a complex topic. It's a complex terminology. We are not familiar with it. It's important to deconstruct it a bit and understand where it comes from and what it actually means. So, Rosie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Baru. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if this makes it through. In any case, while that happens, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to be part of the session, and also to be helping support you guys with your program in this really, really important area, as you say, Baru. You introduced me. I'm Rosie Davenport. I am the founder of Impact Focus, which is a specialist communications agency, and we specialize in sustainability. You asked me at the Shift to give an introduction to what is quite a complex area and field, which is really, although it's not completely new, is now, just as you say, emerging to be quite a major force that businesses really need to start learning to grapple with. So over the next 5 or so minutes, I'm going to give a bit of an overview and a bit of a scene setter. So what are the origins of due diligence? Well, thanks to the work of a collective of scholars, academics, we know that the term due diligence dates back to Roman law. And what the lawyers at the time there established was a concept of an expected standard of care. And this idea that there is a context specific to that. So what does that mean in practice? Well, it's linked to the idea that a person is only responsible for something if it goes wrong, dependent on the facts of the case. So why have we got a picture of a farmer here? Well, the Roman lawyers used the example of farmers at the time and how they would burn hay. So the idea being that if this guy here, when he goes to light his pile of hay, if he does it on a day where it's completely still, there's no wind and there's no damage going to be caused, he can control the fire, then he would be considered to have met his obligations. However, if he picked a day to set fire to this pile of hay where it was windy and he was unable to control the fire, and that led to damage to his neighbour's crop, then he would be liable for that damage. So this is an important distinction that was made in Roman law. As I said, it is linked then to the context of business and how they behave. But what does that mean in practice? Let's bring it forward a little bit to more present day. So a good place to look is the UN Guiding Principles, and the architect of those, the Professor John Ruggie. So in its simplest form, the idea of due diligence is to do no harm. And the framework that was provided through these guiding principles was hailed as something of a new era, I suppose, for businesses, because it gave them the opportunity to actually embrace their value chain and look in the blind spots and understand what is actually going on. So wherever there is something that they're not sure about, instead of just sort of ignoring it, the process of due diligence actually empowers businesses to change and to assess that risk and to respond to it. So the comment here from John Ruggie, where we say it's no longer about naming and shaming, it's about knowing and showing, is really at the heart of what due diligence is about. So what has happened in terms of the legislation that is happening actually around the world, I guess brings this topic right now to really emphasizes the importance of it. So we're in a situation, as many of you will know, where the EU directive is imminently about to be released. That we hope that will unite what happens across Europe, because we've ended up in a situation which, because of the delays to that being published, member countries have gone in their own direction and implemented laws, and we now are getting to a situation where there is a proliferation of terminology and different definitions of due diligence. So I've listed some here for you. And as I said, many of you will be aware of these, and you're probably trying to understand what they mean for your business. And so we've ended up with something of a patchwork, which isn't ideal, and makes it tricky for companies to interpret and to know how they need to respond to due diligence. So we are hoping that when the EU does publish what its intentions are going to be, that will be unifying in some way, and people will then be able to actually come together around the common aims of that. We, of course, have still yet to see what Belgium decide to do, and again, that there's many question marks that still need to be answered there. So how do we make sense of it? Well, in a way, irrespective of the different terminologies and interpretations and translations, indeed, of the term due diligence, to really understand it, I suppose, and embrace the ethos, you have to go back to talking about what the philosophy of due diligence is, what it's actually trying to achieve. So here are some of the things that due diligence is, and as businesses, they are ideas that in order to say you're doing good due diligence, you need to think about and engage with. So due diligence is preventative. You are assessing risks and you are responding to those risks, but you are doing them with the aim of them not actually becoming risks, so and developing into problems. So it's preventative, which is really powerful, I think, for businesses. It's also informed by engagement. So you need to talk to your stakeholders to really, truly be saying that you have actually done the correct level of due diligence. You've actually asked, you haven't just ticked the box in terms of what you think is going on in your value chain. And it's collaborative as well, which, you know, builds on that last point of stakeholder engagement. But it could also involve collaborative approaches with people in different industries or the same industries, but with common problems. And it means that people can come together and do research to try to move their industry or the issues along further together. Though I would stress the collaborative approach is really important, but it can't be the only solution that a business takes. And lastly, it is ongoing, and it's not just something that you do once. It's a really complex issue, so you need to make sure that you are really keeping your fingers on the control to know what's actually going on. So it's not just something you can do, you know, once every few years and hope that nothing's changed, because everything is constantly evolving. And the last thing I would say is that due diligence is also difficult. And it's not easy to implement, and it's not always very easy to understand. So I'll finish on a quote from John Ruggie, again, who wrote those UN guiding principles. And his philosophy was that there is unfortunately not one silver bullet solution for businesses and human rights. So it's a journey, and I think it's very encouraging that so many businesses want to be part of the session today and the programme that's upcoming, and I'm sure the Shift's work will be able to move the dial in that direction. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rosie, and for this very interesting and insightful presentation. And I know you've met very interesting persons and actors on the topic, and I think that was quite insightful. So now I'll leave the floor to Shippo, my dear colleague Shippo, who will give us a small overview of the main frameworks and the legislation that exists on the topic on due diligence, and that tend to guide a bit the work of enterprises and organizations, because not only enterprises are concerned, but also general organizations. And then she will also expose a bit the main reasons why enterprise should undertake due diligence. So, Shippo, up to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Priya, for the floor. And so I'll just introduce myself. My name is Shippo Mbau. I'm the project officer for Sustainable Development Goals. And together with my colleague, Priya, we are currently working on the theme human rights. I joined the Shift last year after 5 years of experience working in the field of public policy research, advocacy, as well as monitoring and evaluation of development projects in Africa. So today's my topic is to give you just an overview of the guidelines and legislations that are available on due diligence and the reasons why enterprises should undertake human rights and environmental due diligence. So I will not go into depth in each of the guidelines, but I will simply give you an overview because we have already covered this topic in our previous webinars. So if you need any extra information or any detailed explanation for each of these frameworks, then you can always see and refer to the link that I have put at the end of my slides. So with here, I've just highlighted 5 frameworks that are commonly referred to when it comes to human rights and environmental due diligence. And I'll begin with ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. Next slide. So it is based on the 7 key underlying principles that I've listed on the right. So it basically encourages enterprises to reflect on their daily business conduct. If we are talking, for example, on fair operating practices, then you would ask yourself, are you being fair with your competitors? Or are you being fair with other players in the market? Are you being fair with your suppliers? And so forth. So this guideline is simply to help you come up with strategies to address any areas that you are where you could actually be falling short. So I will not go into detail with the other subjects like human rights and labor practices, but it's in all these subjects there's a detailed explanation where you can find relevant information when you are interested to do due diligence in this regard. So I'll also talk about the ILO tripartite declaration. Next slide. Yeah, so the ILO tripartite declaration of principles concerning multinational enterprises and social policy. It is the only tripartite UN agency with government, employer, and worker representatives. And this guideline offers recommendations and guidelines in the areas such as employment, training, conditions of work and life, as well as industrial relations. So basically, it's the principles are not binding, are not legally binding, but they are voluntary, and organizations in each countries can agree to adopt them. Then we also have the UN Global Compact, and this recommendation has got 10 principles, which covers different aspects, including human rights, including labor, environment, and anti-corruption. So basically, this guideline is derived from different declarations, such as the ILO and the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. So all these are simply giving guidelines on how best an organization, an enterprise can conduct due diligence. But we also have the UN guiding principle. Next slide. So probably it's also one of the popular guidelines that you can find in terms of human rights and environmental due diligence. And this one is based on the 3 pillars: to protect, to respect, and to remedy. So the state has got a duty to, for example, to protect human rights. And the companies also have a duty to respect human rights. And on the other hand, affected people must always have access to remedy. So the guiding principles talk a lot about respecting human rights, and say that companies cannot just offset human rights harms with philanthropy. So, for example, if your enterprise is going to donate computers to a school, or maybe build a clinic, or maybe build a hospital, or this can be regarded as a beneficial to the society. But if the same company is overlooking harassment in its workplaces, or maybe overlooking child labor in its supply chains, or harm to health from pollution from its operations, then there is no beneficial acts that can cancel or reduce that reality. So just to sum up these regulations, I will talk a little bit about the OECD guidelines. And these are recommendations that enterprises can take to conduct due diligence in order to identify, prevent, or mitigate and account for how actual and potential adverse impacts are addressed. But in order to help the enterprises with the implementation of these ideas, then there is the due diligence guidance on responsible business conduct, which was also developed and adopted in 2018. Next slide. So this guidance is based on an analysis of the risks incurred throughout the whole supply chain, particularly in the environmental, social, and governance matters. And what is important to note is that it's a continuous process, and it gives a detailed explanation as well as tips and illustrative examples of due diligence. So the guidance is based on an analysis of the risk that each enterprise incurred throughout its supply chain. And it draws from different approaches that are contained in sector-specific due diligence guidance that were already developed by the OECD. So, like for each sector, there have been, for example, a specific guidance for enterprises involved in minerals or in garment and footwear sectors. These are just examples. Next slide. So this sectoral guidance, they establish a common understanding among governments, amongst the business, among civil society, and workers on due diligence for responsible business conduct. So the governments that are adhering to the OECD guidelines, they are required to set up a national contact point. They are called NCP in short, and they are there to advise enterprises on taking appropriate measures and providing mediation and reconciliation. So countries that are subscribing to this would then ensure that they are applied globally or locally, and locally by their companies. So to this date, we have about 50 NCPs, and they've collectively handled over 600 cases that are addressing a wide variety of business impacts in over 100 countries and territories, which is quite a large scale. Besides these regulations that I've been highlighting, we have different country legislation that are available in different countries. So for instance, in 2010, there was the Dodd-Frank Act. We have the Australian Modern Slavery Act. We have the Swiss Supply Chain Law, and so forth. But even though they are all different and country specific, all these legislation that are available to date, the commonality is to be able to track their supply chain, to be able to help companies to identify risks that are associated in their supply chain, and to come up with strategies that can help to mitigate those risks. So even if due diligence legislation sometimes is mainly concentrating on maybe multinational enterprises, there is still an indirect effect to all the enterprises, whether small or large. And this is also one of the reasons why all the enterprises should be ready and committed to undertaking due diligence, because the corporate responsibility to respect human rights applies to all business enterprises, regardless of their size, regardless of their sector, even their location or ownership and structure. So I will just highlight here a few reasons that enterprises why enterprises should undertake human rights and environmental due diligence. So first of all, you need to also remain competitive. There is a lot of competition going around, and nowadays, if your enterprise is not conducting due diligence, then you lose a little bit of market. There is an issue of marketability to say. So in order to be able to gain access to funding, for example, in order to also market yourself as an enterprise which is doing something to manage their own risk, it allows an organization to stay ahead of events and stay ahead of time. And due diligence is also an advantage of enhancing supplier collaboration. If you begin to work with your suppliers, you find that even communication is enhanced, because you'll be able to talk with your suppliers, you'll be able to talk through the challenges that they are also experiencing, and sit down and map out better ways of handling your suppliers. And we can talk about a lot of opportunities. We can also talk about the upcoming Belgian legislation here in Belgium. So like I said before, even if you are not directly affected by the legislation that is upcoming, the chances are high that even if you are supplying to a multinational enterprise, you will still be required to undertake this due diligence, because they also have to report. And we can also talk about your company's reputation. If you, for example, you do not do due diligence and there is a lot of human rights abuses happening in your supply chain, then nowadays with the technology available, it's very easy that you find your name over in every way, talking about maybe how negligent you have been. So in order to avoid that and to maintain your reputation, you still need to undertake that. And then this will also help you improve your impact as an enterprise, and helping, because if you are taking, for example, initiatives to improve inclusion and diversity in the workplace, then it means that you are not only minding about the risk, but you are also improving inclusion in the society, and you are contributing towards sustainability. So I will not talk a lot of, I will not talk more about this, but all these benefits, they come together and they are central around respecting human rights and contributing to a sustainable world. So each step that you are taking, Rome is not built in one day. Each step that an enterprise take to manage its supply chain, to do due diligence, it is a step towards contributing to in sustainable world and contributing to respecting human rights. So having said all this, I would ask you again, are you willing to do something better, and are you willing to learn and know what it takes to get started? So my colleague Brew will also explain to you more on the activities that are being organized by the Shift to help you with the practical implementation of human rights and environmental due diligence. I will end here. Thank you so much. If you still have questions, then you are free to contact us and also refer to the links that I've provided at the end of this presentation, which will be shared to you.
Thanks a lot, Chipo. That was super clear, and I wanted to add as well on the European legislation. We should be hearing from it in the coming weeks, if not days, and so it's important to keep our ears open. And the Belgian legislation it is waiting actually for the European legislation, so it might be the following step here. So things are happening, and so concretely, how we can prepare for human rights and environmental due diligence legislation, and also meet all the objectives that Shippo has presented. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll present briefly what the Shift is doing on the program. We've done, as I said, for the past few years, we've covered the topic, and we are focusing more and more on it because we see its importance. So we've done a few webinars covering the different steps of the due diligence implementation. Most of the webinars recordings are available on our YouTube channel, so feel free to explore the YouTube channel and find those webinars. We also explain a bit more into detail the legislation, the different frameworks, etc. So that could be interesting for you. We are going to organize a few events in the coming years. So we're doing. It's important to precise with support from.
Sorry, Brio.
Yes.
You have to share also your slide. I think you are still sharing mine.
I think so, yeah.
Oh.
Technology.
Yeah, good point. There we go.
Yeah, perfect.
Better?
Yeah.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Great. I like this kind of breathing moment. It's important to breathe in a bit during the webinar, so it's perfect for the audience. So stepping back in what I was saying, so we have support from the Belgian corporation with the intention to have concrete impact where it's needed, and mostly in southern countries. And so we at the Shift, all we can do is encourage our members to take action, to have positive impact in the southern countries. So as part of this, we're organizing all these activities, including an event in person finally on March 31st, which will be accessible only to members, where we'll cover the European legislation, what it takes into account, who it concerns, and concrete action, how to act for aligning with the legislation. And so we'll have testimonies from enterprise, but also an NGO and label organization, but also a public institution. And there's going to be an expert explaining a bit the legislation, etc. So members are invited to come, and we'll share the invitation soon. Later in May, we organize an event on public procurement and how public actors together with enterprise can work together to implement human rights and environmental due diligence and make sure that they guarantee some responsibility in the value chain. And similar events around the partnership between NGOs and enterprise will take place towards the last quarter. And we want to explore how NGO can partner with enterprise because NGO have sometimes a good understanding of what's happening on the ground in the southern countries or in producing countries, and they understand what's at stake, and they can advise maybe enterprise and on how to act. The Shift plays an important role in connecting actors together, of course, as I've just described for public actors and NGOs. But we also have we're creating an online library, so we often write articles or have articles written by journalists like Rosie. But we also share links and presentation of actors, etc. So we are pulling together an online library, so that will be available to our members and also some parts to non-members. But we also share a lot of information, of course, in the network via the social platforms, etc. And we've done concretely on due diligence of a series of 5 videos explaining the 5 steps to implement human rights due diligence. And each video contains testimony from an enterprise and from an SME. And we took these videos so we made this video out of the workshop series that we organized last year. So we organized a 5 workshop series spread over a period of 6 months, and we're organizing this again this year. And so interested enterprise and mostly SMEs are very invited to subscribe, because there are still seats around the table. So it's still possible. Concretely, what it will consist of. So it's we'll guide the enterprise through the 5 steps. So we'll ask an expert consultant in the area. Last year it was Cap Conseil or member, but we see if we continue, it's not clear yet. And then the enterprise will also receive 5 hours of consulting support. That's all for free for the enterprises, and you don't have to be member for this, because we want to help enterprise to implement the due diligence process. So the 5 steps concretely, first is understand and integrate human rights and environmental due diligence. What it means, it's understanding is what we're doing today, is how are you concerned as an enterprise, as an SME by this, and who should take responsibility for this in the company, who should take the lead, and how to make sure that the management is involved in the process. Then the second step, the second workshop, and so there is a gap of a month or 2 between each workshops to give time to implement the lesson learned during the workshop. So the second step is map the value chain and its risks. So identify all the suppliers and clients and stakeholders that are present in the value chain and have an important role to play, and how they're facing risk, environmental or social risk. So that's the second step. The third step is determining appropriate tools and measures. So what are the tools that at the level of the enterprise can take or can use to apply to this risk. The fourth step is implementation. So it's applying those tools that you have identified and the measures that you have identified to identified risk. So the tools, it can be defining a code of conduct. It can be engaging with the suppliers in a trustful relationship. It can be sending a questionnaire or sending an auditor. There's many different ways. You can join a multi-stakeholder approach, etc. And then the last step is verify, remedy, and communicate about what you have implemented. Even though it's not perfect, it's important to communicate openly. So I invite you to, if you want to know more concretely, invite you to watch those 5 videos, because they describe those 5 steps. Going back to the workshops, it can be anyone from the procurement, sustainability management staff that can participate. Best is procurement staff, because they are the first person in charge of this. Of course, the steps are aligned with the OECD and UN guiding principles. And the objective, as I said, is to have positive impact for the people and the planet in the producing countries, in the value chain, and in particular in southern countries. So a few important lessons, and I'll go fast because I see that time flies. A few important lessons from our activities is, well, it's essential. Human rights and environmental due diligence is essential for achieving the SDGs, and we've seen with the spillover index. But it is a complex process. And it's still little implemented, in fact, by enterprise, and some enterprise and large enterprise, and also some small scale enterprise are starting it. And we need to continue. We need to extend that and upscale to a different level to have really large impact. It's very singular. It's very different for every actor, because you all have different sectors, different relationship with your suppliers and your value chain. You have different challenges, different different characteristic, and so, but there is way to mutualize the efforts, to put the efforts together through partnerships, direct partnerships, either with an NGO as I described, or with public actors, as it happens more and more. but also with other enterprises that are working in the same sector. And there are many multi-stakeholders initiatives depending on the sector. So there's the Beyond Chocolate initiative that the Shift started a few years ago around chocolate. So all the actors from the chocolate sector got together to work on those challenges and issues. But also other initiatives such as the Fairway Foundation, which actors involved in textile can join to have more sustainable textile. There are multiple complementary approach to do. I've said that a bit before. So code of conduct, questionnaires, trust relationship, labels. There's many platforms. Most are fees. You have to pay a fee, but not all of them. And there's more and more free open source tools that are being developed for all actors and especially for SMEs. It's important to, and I've said that it's important to involve the management and determine the persons in charge to make sure that it's not just like a slide project where we start on the side, but it's really, it gets at the core business of the enterprise. And the harder is to start actually, because as you start progressively, you will see that you will integrate that into your company's process and activities, and it will become natural to go one step further each time. Also, it's very important to know that it's never we are never too small to have an impact. Sometimes we have SMEs that say, well, you know, I represent only 5% of my supplier, and he doesn't care about what I think of his sustainability practice. But that's actually not really true, because if you say that, and there's another procurement client that represent 5%, I also say that slowly you are growing the seed and adding to the pressure. And maybe the company or the supplier is already asking how it can do to improve its sustainability. And so maybe you can, you know, he will need your help in doing that, or to brainstorm or see how together you can put something in place. So really you're never too small. And we've seen that with the enterprise participating to our activities. And yeah, so the road to sustainable value chain is still very long, of course, but expertise is growing in Belgium and abroad. Legislation is putting the attention on this on sustainable value chain more and more, and so we think that it's changing, and so it's time for all the enterprise to take action, and that's what we are here to help them with. A few additional sources and tools on human rights and environmental due diligence. So the FIDO and EFDD, the Federal Institute for Sustainable Development, so Belgian institute, he's doing a lot around due diligence, and it started recently the second consultation for the second National Action Plan on due diligence. So there's the link in the presentation that I will share with you. So if you want to participate to this consultation, it's ongoing. They've also started learning networks with FEVIA and Agoria, and I think the learning networks for Agoria are still open to enterprise in the IT sector. And it's managed by Hiva from the KUL, KU11, and Sustainito, the consulting firm. There is a MOOC, so an online training on sustainable trade by KUL. You can have access to the link. And then you have the toolbox and human rights. So the toolbox for human rights for business and an organization. The link is accessible via the picture. That has been it's a platform that has been created by FIDO EFDD that pulls together a lot of information and tools to take action. You have the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. It's a resource center at the international level, acting to improve the way we do business and the sustainability of business. The Danish Institute for Human Rights is also a big source of information. Shift project, which is different from the Shift from organization, which is the specialized organization on the UN guiding principles. It's also a mine of information. And then you have two concrete tools, SME Compass, which is in German and in English, which can help especially SMEs implement step by step the process of due diligence. And actually, FIDO and FIDO EFDD has call for the creation of such a tool at the Belgian level. So it will exist in French and Netherlands, and it will be translated into, and it will be more up to date, I would say. And last but not least is the CSR risk check. It's a platform that regroups lots of risk depending on the sectors, the region, the country, and so you can just, it's an open source. It has been created by MVO Netherlands, and you can just look online, and you will, depending on your sector, you can look for the risk that your enterprise may be related to, or depending on the region, etc. So it's a very nice tool. Well, thank you very much. Now, if you have any question and suggestion, it's no time to speak out. And also, more generally, if you have any experience to share, let us know. So we'll collect questions now. And I see we've lasted much longer than expected, but it's fine. We had many things to say. Maybe we should have warned you that there would be some questions coming. No?
I see in the chat someone asking for the extra links. So we are also going to share with you these presentations that we've just done. And if you look at the end of the presentation, you'll find all the links, extra links for information regarding everything that we've presented. And for the webinars that we did before, we did a webinar on ABC for due diligence. And there's an explanation for all the frameworks that are available. And you can also still access those links at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, I see there's 2 questions on the EU legislation. So those are good questions, and as I said, it's expected to come out. I've heard on Wednesday, so things are moving. There's already a few sessions planned by different organizations, and I haven't shared them here in the presentation, but I would add them in when we share the presentation, because they're open to all, and you're free to subscribe. And during those sessions, they will explain a bit more the content of the EU legislation. For now, it's a bit early because it's lots of speculation. It has changed a lot in the past weeks and months, and so we're really looking forward to see the end result of it, and we hope it's going to be as ambitious as possible, and to have, of course, concrete impact on the ground. As we said, that's what important is, not to add burden for enterprise, but also mostly to have concrete positive impact. So we'll share the link to those sessions. So there's a question from Antoine Cordier. My question is, with the increasing complexity of value chains and increasing number of actors in supply chains, how can you handle this many elements in your human rights and environmental due diligence processes? That's a good question. As I said, there is no one way to do it. What is important is to start. It depends how far you are in the process. You have to start digging a bit into the value chain, map your actors, and then you sometimes have to prioritize. So based on the first quick mapping exercise, you will see that you may be related to, for instance, cobalt extraction or textile coming from the Uyghur region in China. And so you will have to work more in priority on those topics. So I think that's the best way to do, is to start first, like have an overall mapping of where your risks are, and then start working on those with the higher risk, and then progressively go with the others.
Yes, and just to add on that, it's really indeed a complex process, because it involves a lot of analyzing the supply chains. So especially for multinational enterprises or bigger organizations which are working with a lot of suppliers, it can be really quite challenging. But the starting point is to see who are the direct suppliers that are supplying to you, directly to you. And then you start from there, and then you later add on their suppliers and their suppliers until you get it. So like Brio has already said, the first challenge is to start. Once you start, then you realize that, okay, it's doable. And but if you don't start, then you will not realize what you're missing and how much change and positive impact you can actually make.
Yeah, thank you for this input. I see also a interesting question on SDGs, ESG, HREDD, another way to say the same things. I totally hear you, and sometimes it's very complicated because there's always like new terms coming in, and it's confusing. It just creates more confusion. And they sometimes say the same thing, and sometimes it's, and of course, the specificities. And yeah, our role at the Shift is really to well, make it as simple as possible to understand, and as concrete action oriented as possible as well. So yeah, it's I wish we had a very simple glossary, but sometimes it's important to understand the terminology, and that's why we try to have as little terminology as possible to you. No more questions. I'm going through the chat. Anyways, I think it's time to end this. But thanks a lot, Rosie and Chipo. Thanks a lot to all of you for participating. We hope it made it a bit clearer for you, this complex topic. But it's important to remind what we're talking about is really reducing the impact on our environment and on all aspects. So in terms of pollution, deforestation, climate change, and also ensure like good and decent ways of living and working for most humans, all humans on the planet. And we have a responsibility in this. So thanks a lot for participating today, and see you hopefully next time in person.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good afternoon.